Hello, everyone. I'm Mildred Warner, and I'm very pleased today to welcome Dr. Andrés Martínez Moscoso from the Universidad San Francisco de Quito, and he's going to speak to us today about heritage, healthy environment, rights to the city, and rights of nature. You need to turn your head on just a little bit of a different way, because most of our rights, at least in the US context, are person-based, not nature-based. And when you put nature rights in your Constitution, what does it mean? What does it look like? So this is a chance for some Global South, Global North learning exchange. And we're going to have a talk back in room 106 right after this lecture, where we can spend more time talking about these issues. Now, Dr. Martínez got his PhD in politics and constitutional studies from the University of Alicante in Spain, and he's a professor and director of the Institute of Legal Research in the College of Jurisprudence at the Universidad San Francisco de Quito in Ecuador. He has many publications, and he's recognized nationally and internationally for his expertise in water management and environmental law. He also serves as the executive secretary of the International Society of Public Law, and he's a member of the World Commission on Environmental Law of the International Union for Conservation of Nature. So he's a person with a global view. Now, one thing we do, Andrés, since the racial reckoning at the beginning of COVID, when we had a lot of Black Lives Matter protests happening across the US that summer of 2020, is many institutions looked at themselves to see their own complicity in racism. And Cornell did that. And one of the things that came out of that effort was a land acknowledgement, because Cornell is located on the traditional homelands of the Guayacono Nation, which is the Cayuga Nation for whom Cayuga Lake is named. The Guayacono are members of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, sometimes called the Iroquois Confederacy, of 7 different indigenous nations, 6 different sovereign nations, who have a historic and still contemporary presence on this land. In fact, their form of democratic governance was copied into the US Constitution, which you might find interesting. So we do have an indigenous perspective on governance that's actually reflected in our Constitution, though most people did not learn that in their civics class in 4th grade. But we're working on that part too, to have better education. The Confederacy precedes the establishment of Cornell and of New York State, and indeed of the United States, because they were here first. We acknowledge the painful history of Guayacono dispossession and honor the ongoing connection of Guayacono people, past and present, to these lands and waters. The Guayacono people are one of the few indigenous nations that had its land taken from them and no reservation ever provided. They remain landless to this day. It's been in the courts for the 50 years I have been living here. It has been in the courts. So we have a long way to go to get to a real, the first step is acknowledgement. That's what we do at every lecture. The second step is to actually do something about it. And we wait, and wait, and wait. But in Ecuador, y'all did something about it with your 2008 Constitution, and we're going to hear what that meant. I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Professor Warner, Jeff, Natasha. Thank you for all the efforts to this long trip to be here. I hope you will enjoy this little speech, where I will try to connect some different ideas. And as Professor Warner said, you need to change your shift during these 45 minutes to try to understand this concept. Why? First of all, because Ecuador, I will see you and I show you in the map, is in the middle of the world. And as in the middle of the world, that's the name of Ecuador, of course, yeah, like a line. And there's a little joke that you are like an imaginary light so we are like an imaginary country. So in that country happens a lot. This special picture I like a lot, and probably will you understand more about this little country, but with a lot to talk. Why? Because in the picture you could see one of the most important rivers in the country is the Guayas. Guayas is in the Pacific. But you could look Chimborazo volcano, who is one of the most highest mountain in the world. And if you are lucky in a sunny day, you could see in the same picture both. And it's very interesting because in Ecuador, you could cross this little country in a day. First of all, you could start in the Pacific coast, then goes like 40,000 meters in the middle of the Andes, and at night you could stay in the middle of the jungle in the Cuenca, in the Amazonian basin. So it's a little country, but in the middle of the world, so that's the idea of the mega diversity. And you could say, why Andrés is telling us this? And probably it's because we are very, we have like a very big connection with nature. And that's the idea of the rights of the nature and the water, etc. You could hear in this speech words like Pachamama, like Yaku. Pachamama is Mother Earth. So we will hear a lot about that because in our history, we are so connected with these ideas. So in the next minute, I will try to connect this and to answer these questions. Why? Because I will try to answer what could we learn about the rivers from the global south. And you could say, okay, probably nothing because we have before pollutions and a lot of problems in the north, but we create agencies like the agencies of environmental protection. We define some rights and some regulations. So what could we learn about this? And this little country, this is South America, here is Ecuador, and here is the capital. This little country is like 221 municipalities, 24 provinces is like the same idea of the states. But imagine this, especially in this country, we have 20 constitutions only in 200 years. So if you are very clever and smart, we have like one constitution every 10 years. And you say, that's good or not? I'm not being critical with my country, but probably it gives us the opportunity to create and to expand the rights. So it's like the ideal lab for a constitutional lawyer or for sociology or for social movements to add some rights. And during this speech, you will hear about new rights. For example, during the academic, we learned about rights to the city. We have rights to the city recognized in our constitution. You learned about right to water or rights of nature, like in academic and the doctrine. We recognize rights of nature. And this idea is very important because Ecuador is the unique country around the world that recognizes rights of nature in this constitution. Because in other cases, for example, in New Zealand, and Colombia, and Peru, etc., they recognize in decisions or probably in other regulations, but not in the constitution. So that's the importance. Last year, for example, in Chile, they debate in the new constitution that is be a good opportunity to include or not. You know what happened in Chile with social movements, etc., but they decide to vote against the new text of the constitution. But to return to Ecuador, there is very interesting things to talk about rights of nature and specific about the role of the Constitutional Court. I will talk a lot about this idea of the Constitutional Court. And the Constitutional Court is the maximum court that rule only the constitutional rights. We have like two courts, the National Court and the Constitutional Court. in all the countries, you have, for example, the Supreme Court. We have two organisms. This is the Constitutional Court. So the Constitutional Court decides and makes some precedents about rights to the nature. So we have like two steps. First, we recognize rights of nature, and then we develop the concept of rights of nature specific in some areas. And in the area that I will try to explain you is about the rivers and the relation, for example, with society, with citizens, and of course, of the city. But let's talk about something about the history, about the continent and the region, about this relation, about the nature and specific some resources. And one of the resources that is so important for us is water. Yeah? In Quechua, that is the language of the people of Andean countries, of Aborigines, Yaku is water. So Yaku is water. So in some part of the methodology, for example, in the history, the idea and the precedent of the Incas in part starts in the relation with water. Why? Because, for example, the first Inca born through a union with the lake Titicaca. Titicaca is in the middle of Peru and Bolivia, and then expands to the north to Peru, to Ecuador, and part of Colombia. And they say, they believe that the Pachamama, the Mother Earth, yeah, is between the Yaku and born the Inca. The Inca is the son of the sun, so is who is in the empire. But this idea of the water is so interesting because it's not the same in other cultures, of course. For example, if you visit, this is of Tambo Machay, for example, this picture, Tambo Machay is near from Machu Picchu in Cusco, in Peru. So they built a very interesting infrastructure about water. So water is so important for his culture. And of course, they developed some infrastructure to manage it. For example, to ideas to connect to irrigation, to the crops, and of course to drinking water. And as well, because the Inca was the king of the empire, they believe that water they use, for example, for purification. You know that water is a symbol as well for purification in different cultures, in different religions. Incas and Aborigines use as well water. And for example, the Inca has an special bathrooms. Like the terms in Roma, they have their own terms in the Incas. So the history repeat in different countries with no any relation, of course, with Europe and Latin America. But what happened then? Then we start with colonial period. We have the presence of Portuguese and especially of the Spanish. And the Spanish crown, this is very interesting for planning and the idea of the city and how then we develop that idea. The people from Spain crown say, okay, if you want to found a new city, you need some ideas and you need some regulations and you need some elements. And one of the most important elements is water, of course. You could found new cities near to a lake or near to, for example, a river. So part of the most important cities in Latin America are near from a lake or a city. That's natural for all the cultures. But in the case of the crown, the Spanish crown, they regulate it. So they regulate it, but it depends because the forms that they use the water is not directly to the home. So they put, for example, this picture is in the center of the capital of Ecuador, Quito. In Quito, for example, to access to the water, they built fontaine in the middle of the city. So here start, for example, this idea of exploitation that Professor Warner said before, to some class to start to exploit another. And in the case of Ecuador in the Latin America, the case is between, of course, Spanish and the indigenous people. in this case, the indigenous people become like a species of slaves. So, for example, the worst works in the colonial period they made. And in this case, it calls the work of aguateros, or people, the watermen. So they put the water here and then conduct to the principal homes of the rich people to have access to water. And of course, if you have money, you have access to water. If you don't have money, you need to go to the fountain or probably near to the river. So here start probably this relation that the people of indigenous people keep this relation with nature and with the resources, but the people from other positions like didn't feel this relation. And this graphic is really interesting. And this picture could explain a lot of what happened after. There are two very interesting pictures. The first one is the city where I born, Cuenca, and this is the capital, Quito. I restore, of course, the images. This is from initial of the 20th century. This is Quito, and this is Quito, and this is Cuenca. What is different? Because Cuenca, you look here, is a man with his son near to the river, and here you have a recent picture of the people, and this is a specific people, for example, campesinos and native people that used to wash their clothes in the river. This is a tradition. And for example, to talk about heritage, I was talking with Professor Jeff before, and Cuenca and Quito, they are a very important heritage capitals around the world of the human heritage. And in the case of Cuenca, for example, one of the reasons of the decision of UNESCO was specific, for example, that the role, how the people connect with some forms of the city. In this case, the people from Cuenca protect the rivers. For example, they have 4 rivers in the middle of the city, but they protect because they use it. So they have that relation. So then, after, with the expansion of the city, they build some infrastructure, for example, for gray water, etc. But the case of Quito is not the same, but it's the capital. What happened here? In the case of Cuenca, you look all the houses, etc., built near to the river. And here, look what happened now in Quito. In Quito, that is the capital, they have only the 3% of wastewater treatment. And in the case of Cuenca, they have more like 90%. What happened? In this case, probably the people disconnected with nature and with their resources. For example, in the case of Quito, the people start to build so far from the rivers because they use the rivers like a garbage store. And they put all the water there and disconnected everything. So and this part is very interesting as well because the regulation during the colony and then the republic period, for example, put emphasis in the case of Quito, to, for example, only dispose all the wastewater directly to the river. And it's not the case of Cuenca. So probably here the answer of the question is that resources in nature matters, but it depends that who decides. And who decides, and then in the future, in the next future, it implemented a lot. But what happened now? What happened now is a reality around the world. Around the world, we talk about rights of nature. And it's not the unique case of Ecuador. I explained to you before why Ecuador is very important, because it's the unique country around the world who recognized in its constitution. But what happened in the rest of the countries? And this is very interesting about rivers. Why? Because one decision of the Constitutional Court said that rivers, they are living ecosystems. So it's very interesting to understand the rights of nature through rivers, because it's easy to understand that a river is a live ecosystem. It's not the same, for example, like with a mangrove forest, or probably with animals, etc. But in the case of rivers, it's easily. So probably that's the reason that in New Zealand with Wanganui River, that's the reason what in Atrato River in Colombia, and what will be the reason, for example, in Marañón River, that they recognize that rights. But here is another element. It's about what happened with native people. And probably here we could start a little debate. Why? Because in all of these cases, native peoples start the process. Why? Because they are so connected with this. But probably the decision of the tribunals is in not the same light. Why? Because the native people, the aborigines, they think and they believe that the Mother Earth, and in this case the rivers, are part as well as a legal entity. But the decisions of the courts in these three cases put a specific a guardian. So this is a big debate between what? An anthropocentric vision and an ecocentric vision. Why? Because the classic idea, and I'm not against of this idea, I only explaining, the classic idea of environmental law and regulation, what is? Is of course about what? That I protect ecosystem because I need it to survive. And of course, I put all the measures and all the regulation of it. But in the case, this new wave of rights of nature is totally different because it's the ecocentric vision. So the ecocentric vision, the statement is what? I protect the ecosystem not because I want to use it. I protect it by his own. So that's the difference. So I answer, I demand something to the court, and I said by my ecocentric vision, but I receive a response from the anthropocentric vision. Why? Because I demand as a native people the protection of the river, but I receive the response by an idea of anthropocentric, because I said, okay, I recognize you like the life and of course as a right of nature of the river, but you need a protection, and you need a guardian, and the guardian will be the community. In the community, I will give you some money and some resources to keep and to implement the restoration and the implementation to improve the quality of the river. In the two cases, for example, of Marañón River and Atrato River, that is in Colombia and Peru, there are a big discussion specific in the south about what happened with the exploitation of resources. In the two cases, in the first one in Atrato is mining, and the second one in Marañón is oil. So we have a very big dispute of that. And this is one of the most important debate, for example, in our Latin American country. We are countries, we don't have a really good economy, but we have a lot of resources. So we have this internal and ethic debate. We need to exploit it or keep it. For example, the last year in Ecuador, with all this vision, I tried to explain this in some cases. The people say it's difficult to understand. But for example, in a consulting in Ecuador the last year, the people decide, for example, to keep the oil in a specific part or a very important forest is called Yasuní, because it's one of the most mega diversity in the country and around the world. But you could say, okay, but there are a lot of resources. You could obtain a lot of money of that, and you could then put in practice with public service. Yeah, but people believe that it's better to keep it on the soil. So that could give you some ideas to how to understand this problem in Latin America, and in specific in Ecuador. We have two very interesting cases of the Constitutional Court. This first case I will try to explain you quickly because it's in the rural area. I will try to concentrate the case of in the city. The first one, we have two cases, two decisions of the Constitutional Court in Ecuador. The first one is in the rural area, and the second in the city. The first one is the name of Akepi River. What happened in Akepi River? It was a discussion between the model and the uses of water. In Ecuador, in our constitution again, we have like a appellation of the uses of water. First, drinking water. Second, water for food sovereignty. The third is the ecological flow. And the fourth is for production. In this specific case, it was a discussion between drinking water, ecological flow, and what happened with productive bushes. Okay, what happened here? The problem was that a little town demand, and they have the authorization to use the water for drinking water. Then other part of the population say, okay, we need water for production. I don't know if you know this, but Ecuador is one of the most important country that exports banana, and baby banana as well. This case was specific for irrigation for baby banana. And they obtained the authorization of the use for irrigation for these crops. But the problem was that the national authority didn't identify and didn't do a really good analysis because they forgot, I don't know if it was intentional or not, but they forgot the quantity of the ecological flow. So it produced in the nature, of course, a problem, specific in the ecological flow of Akepi River. So the people, and this is one of the statements of this speech, that the people starts to change their behavior and the forms how to protest them and to try to obtain their rights, not directly in the streets, because during a long period of time, it was very typical in the global south to protest. But they changed now, for example, to the tribunals, because in the specific case of Ecuador, since the Constitution of 2008, we expand the right. So it's easily to go to a tribunal, to go to a judge, and to ask, for example, to protect my rights. In this case, the Constitutional Court said, okay, in this case, Akepi River is rights of nature, is a legal entity. Why? Because it's an ecosystem, it's a live ecosystem. So if you don't have the specific quantity of water, it's impossible to have life there. So in my case, as a part of the Constitutional Court, I will decide and say that the state, in the case the National Authority of Water, goes against the rights of the river. So I gave some reparation. And probably the most important things are the reparation. And part of the reparation was, for example, to put against in line 0 of the authorization of these crops. And then, for example, the state create a reserve, a natural reserve of water in Akepi River. So to keep, in this case, the ecological flow. The second case, it's called Monjas River. Monjas River is in the middle of the city of Quito. And it's very interesting because it's not the rural, it's a urban case. But this urban case explains a lot that I told you before. Why? Because here we could understand that disconnected form that the local authorities plan the city and expands the city with no, for example, non-specific regulation. The case of Monjas, look how it looks, Monjas. It's not the best picture. Look here. The problem of Monjas was that this river increased this ecological flow because only is with gray water. So all the city deposit there all the sewage water of sanitation, and it increased the ecological flow. The problem starts here, and look how heritage, rights of city, environmental rights, and rights of nature connected here. And probably that's the statement of this speech, that rights of nature could be in the future become like in a bridge to connect rights. This case starts with the problem of two ladies that live in one of the part of the hill near to the river. They are owner of one of an oldest house and declared a national heritage because it was the home of one of the wife of one of the most important generals of the independence period. It's called Marquesa de Solanda. She was the wife of Sucre. Antonio José de Sucre was one of the generals of the independence of Latin America. So it was very interesting. This lady goes to the municipality and said, okay, please, we need your help because we have a problem with infrastructure. Because Monjas increase this ecological flow, so it goes directly to our house, and we have a problems. Municipality say, it's not my problem. This is a private problem because this is your private property. So in my case, I only could regulate other things. But the problem specific here is that the increase of the level of the river, it was guilty of the municipality because the municipality puts directly gray water on the river. So if the increase, it makes some problems. These two ladies go to the tribunals, and in the tribunals it starts first only to fight with this idea of the right of heritage. In the case of Ecuador, the judges could expand the demand because applying a principle that the judge knows the rights. So in this case, the judge says, okay, you demand this, but I could connect with other things. So the judge, probably here you could say this is an activist of the judge, but he starts to talk about what happened with the pollution of the river, specific to talk about the healthy environment. Then it starts to talk about the quality of the water. And then, of course, say that the river is a legal entity to start to talk about what happened with the rights of city, and of course, how to connect with rights of nature. In the case of rights of the city, what happened with the idea of a clean water? The classical concept that some theoricals define about rights of city says that in a city, you could project your dreams, your aspiration in the public infrastructure. And that is recognized in the Constitution. This is not only an idea of the decision. But to try to be in the city, you need clean water, of course. And the judge said, okay, and you need sanitation. It's not possible that in Quito you have only the 3% of wastewater treatment. So in the future, municipality, you need to improve this. And of course, let's talk about historical preservation and disconnect with heritage. What happened with the riparian protection? So we have a lot of problems here specific with the space in the infrastructure. You know that in most part of the cities in the Latin America is a big problem. Is the big problem to talk about land and to talk about the territories and, of course, the cost of land. In the most part of the cities, the best part to build is in the middle when you have all the service, you have all the infrastructure. But the poor people goes directly to other parts. And in the case of Quito, the people starts to build near to the river. A logical question could be, okay, but Andrés, is possible to build near to the river? Of course not. But it's these illegal buildings. So it's part of the problem. And probably this is a responsibility of the municipality, because the municipality previous should go and say, no, here is not authorized. But the problem is that the city expands wherever. So here is a very important idea of planning. Because if you plan and you give, for example, solution for these people, the people will not build here. The people build here because it's the only opportunity to have a home. But probably the municipality didn't think at that time in this, and then it starts the problem. What happened with rights of nature? With rights of nature, starts to talk about what happened in the future with the need to water, to the access, and what happened with that river. This is like a little movement that starts in the capital, and now, at that moment, currently, we have another process of the river, of Machangara River. This is not the only case. We have now another case is Machangara River. So first, change this vision of the anthropocentric vision and think about ecocentric vision. Why about the river? Because it's not only, and here we could debate, it's not only that I use the river, because a lot of people said, okay, I want to repair and to restore the river because I want to swim there. I want to fish again there. I want to walk near to the river. But it's not only the uses I give to the river, because it could be an anthropocentric way. I want to protect it by its own, because it's a live ecosystem. So I need to protect by its own. The second is the maintenance and regeneration of life cycles. We have a lot of examples around the world that in the case of rivers, if you try to repair it and you give some infrastructure solutions, you could repair during a long time, but it's possible. And of course, here you have this right directly connected of rights of nature. Respect and reparation to be restored, and connecting with summa causae. Summa causae is an Quichua word that is well-being. So every country around the world, in its constitutions, in independence declaration, etc., try to assume a role of the state with their citizens. Happiness, well-being, development, etc. In the case of Ecuador, since 2008, is to try to connect with this summa causae idea. What is this summa causae idea? First of all, is an Quichua word, is an Andean cosmovision, and the meaning is to try to connect and to be in harmony with nature. It's not too easy to apply in a capitalist system, of course, but it's the aspiration that I could do my things, but in harmony with nature. Why? Because if you are in the line of the speech, you remember that I said that our native people are so connecting with the idea of Pachamama and, of course, of the nature in general. And the last is, in this case, they apply the precautionary principle because they want the response of the state, because they need to put in practice some measure. What measure? The first one is, look this is my city where I born. It's totally different. Cuenca is different. Why? Because the people preserve, restore, and of course build all the infrastructure through the rivers to protect it. It's the same country. And I put, of course, to try to understand that planning is so important. And it's not only planning, it's the responsibility, is the probably the institutions matters there. And of course, if we try to understand the concept of rights of nature, while working in this project, we believe that rights of nature could put in practice in the future like a bridge. Why like a bridge? Because a bridge connects, and we connect with other rights, specific with rights, for example, for healthy, for environmental, healthy, of course, food, or probably as water. All that rights are recognized in the Constitution, the Ecuadorian Constitution. But we believe that rights of nature could be that bridge to connect it, and to the summe causae idea. Probably I need to go quickly, but I have 3 more slides. Sorry? Yeah, I have? Okay, sorry. The first critic in these cases are that, for example, that the people are concentrate only in one actor. In this case, the only actor that will be demanded was the municipality. But what happened with the rest? Specific, what happened, for example, with the industry? What happened with other actors that are contribute to pollution in the river? Probably the main response is that it's more easily to have only one actor to respond to put in practice the judicial measure. But in the future, we could think more about this, because there are like multi-actors that contribute directly to the pollution of the rivers and pollution, of course, the rest of the ecosystem. But look this. In the case, one of the most important part of the reparation measure are to think about nature-based solutions. You know that this is an idea to connect some principles. First of all, that in some cases, the principal ideas are in the same nature, not in the gray infrastructure, in the green infrastructure. Now, like 2 days ago, I go to another continent. You know what happened in Spain. In Spain, they have one of the worst atmospheric problem and meteorologic consequence about Dana. It's like a big storm in Valencia, and there are like 200 people who pass away. And in Valencia, for example, they work a lot, for example, with gray and green infrastructure. Valencia is the capital of a community of Valencia. And in Valencia, for example, the principal river is called Turia. Turia goes through Valencia, but they have a lot of problems. They built a new infrastructure and changed, for example, the way of the river, because before they have a lot of problems. So Turia now goes for the south. This is, for example, a solution, a gray solution. But a green solution could be worked directly in the, for example, ecosystem. How? For example, keeping forests, building greener cities. And in this case, in Quito, there are a lot of good opportunities. For example, they work, for example, for maintain the fonts specific near to the volcano. This is, for example, Antisana. Antisana is one of the volcanoes near to the city, and they protect all the zone, like a national park, because like the 60% of the water of the city goes for here. So there's a big opportunity to how to keep your resources in the future. Now, currently in Ecuador, we have a big problem about the use of resources. More like 90% of our electricity is hydropower. But now there is no raining like 120 days. So imagine that. We have a big problem. We have now like costs of electricity of 14 hours. So in a little country, it starts with a lot of problems because we believe in that moment that the green solution or the green energy will be the solution. But the response here could be that you need to mixture from gray to green. We have this blue and green regulation in the decision of Monja's case for what? For example, the judge says here, you need Quito municipality to have a regulation to put in practice these ideas. To put in practice these ideas is how? For example, to increase your taxes, we need money. This is not only rhetoric. We need money to put in practice. And of course, we need as well the participation of the city. What could be the difference between Cuenca and Quito? In Cuenca, the people love the city. The people are connected with city. The people are part of the city and are connected with the rivers. Is it impossible to do this in Quito? No, of course, because they are Ecuadorian as well. And for example, a really good idea that happened in Colombia, we are talking about cities, what happened, for example, in Bogota and what happened in Medellin, because their authorities changed the behavior and the identity with the city, and to try to protect, to connect. So we have this opportunity before the collapse to be in the same way of blue and green regulations and to contribute and not to give only the responsibility to one actor, in this case, to the municipality. I have some conclusion for big ideas. First one is to understand that rights of nature could be an opportunity to access and to develop other rights. In some cases, the people think and believe that the conclusion is rights of nature. I think we could work more and to connect and to advance to other level to social rights. The second is to build and to plan green and smart cities. But green and smart cities not to copy-paste. Each cosmovision, each country, each city has their own historical issues. They have their own identity, and to try to respond to the reality and to the ecosystem and the reality, of course, could contribute a lot. If we try only to put in practice other models and to copy and paste in other cities, that's not the solution. But there is a very big opportunity, for example, to use technology in these cases. Not only for security, not only for regulation, not only for decreased rights. We could use this to increase rights and to increase access to increase the level of dignity of the people in the city. The third one is how to connect and believe in sustainable remediation. It's not only to have like decisions. It's very important to think how that judicial decisions, for example, put in practice. Put in practice and, of course, to connect people, connect institutions, and connect the ecosystem, of course. This picture is about one of the worst fire forests that we passed like 2 months ago. Around the world, you know that in some cases, fire forests could be provoked. Why? Because if you have a forest area, then if you have a fire forest, you don't have the forest. So you could change the regulation and you could build, for example, there. So we need to think about, for example, in these areas of sustainable remediation. And the last one is there are multiple responsible actors, but we need multiple commented actors. For example, academia. What's the role of academia? What's the role of NGOs? What's the role of the states? And what is the role of the citizens? In this little story, the role of social movements is really a good experience and is a really good opportunity. Why? Because it's very strange that people from different social movements, for example, in the north, in the south, they are connected through the river. They connected about the idea to protect it, to restore it. But they are not directly with the pollution in front of their homes. They are part of the same movement, of the same idea. So I believe that this is a really good idea in the future, not only to put only one actor that has the responsibility, and of course, we need a lot of people to collaborate it. That's all, and I'm very open for your questions, and I will be a pleasure to answer it.
Hi, Andrés. Well, first of all, I would like to acknowledge how great it is. Well, Malembe, PhD student in the City and Regional Planning Department. Acknowledging how great it is to actually have someone coming from your country to speak about the right of nature and health and right to the city. Someone who is from the place, right, is like very rare here. So bienvenido, thank you for sharing your knowledge. I firmly believe that what happens to the land happens to bodies of people and the communities, right? And so repairing the land means repairing the people. And on that, I also believe that the knowledge of the land and what happens to it, like the rivers, right, it is embodied by the people. So you have spoken a lot about planning and how the right of nature should be centered within that. But I was wondering, what do you think about who are the ones who hold the knowledge and how that type of planning should be happening, right? There's a lot of actors, but many of those actors have held the power historically, right? So what happens with the knowledge of indigenous people and how centered it should be? Yeah.
Thank you so much for your question. Is it okay that I answer? Thank you so much for your question. It's very interesting because in some cases in academia, in some cases we forgot people. We talk about land, we talk about regulations, we talk about planning, but we forgot people. And in these cases, for example, the natural basic solutions, it combined, for example, the idea of the people of native people, for example, because they have traditional knowledge. So it could be a really good opportunity to put in practice this traditional knowledge, but it's hard in some cases for authorities to recognize that because they say, oh, but it's a native practice, that is not a science practice. So there is, in some cases, not only for authorities, academia as well, it's very hard to accept, in some cases, for example, traditional knowledge. Another thing, it could be very interesting as well, is the cases of Atrato River and Marañón River. Why? Because in those cases of Colombia and Peru, the people are part of as a guardians. So they could decide what happened with their territories. Remember that in the case specific of Atrato River, the people from that territory, they are very poor. And they have a lot of problems because there are a polluted river, but they used to fish them. They use as a drinking water, and with that pollution, they keep using it. So now there's an opportunity to increase, of course, the level of his life with dignity, and rights of nature could be an opportunity. I believe it is not the solution, but it could be an opportunity to connect to other rights. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your lecture. So I'm from India, and I think very similarly, we have this vision of rivers as gods and goddesses. So there is a spiritual connection with rivers. And I don't know much about Ecuador, so I'm speaking from where I come from. But when there is, as in the global south, there is a strong focus on growth and a desire for economic growth. And that comes at the cost of nature. And even in environmental law, I mean, countries from the global south are given the right to pollute more, given that, given that they had, given colonialism. And so I was just wondering how you see rights of nature coexisting with such a strong focus on growth and economic growth, and if you think that's something, if you think those two can coexist. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Probably the first question could be why rights of nature in Global South create? And probably the most common response is because part of the society are very worried with what happened with the classical environmental rights. That's the part of your question. Why? Because we have a regulation, but that regulation in the Global South didn't work as well as work, for example, in Europe or in the US with the Environmental Agency. So what's next? Probably to debate other rights. In the case of Ecuador, I think it's an aspiration to put in practice with this word of summa causae, to be in harmony, develop with nature. But as I said before, in my personal opinion, it's so difficult to keep it. Why? Because, of course, in our countries, we have our governments that wants to exploit the resources because they need to grow up. But on the other hand, they have like this regulation. So it's hard to put in practice, but probably it's not impossible. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Yu Chenxie. I'm the first year MRP student, and thank you for discussing the natural-based solutions, which I worked on several real projects and I rooted in this idea. And it's like a specific term emphasizing the sustainable management and the restoration of the nature. And so, but I noticed that in your lecture that it seemed like have a more difference in its focus. So I was just wondering, like, whether the environmental preservation remains in the priority in those green solutions, or it's like there is a more specific, stronger emphasis on the green energy, like as a solution for this.
Thank you so much. In the specific case of Monjas River, as a case of the Constitutional Court, they decide in a part specific of the decision only to talk about a solution based on nature, not about green energy. I only put as an example of the green energy to talk about hydropower. But in the specific case, they say we need to talk more and to put in implementation in the regulations and in the public policies these ideas of solutions based in nature. As well, for example, to talk about what happened before we consume the water, we need to talk about the forest. We need to talk to what happened with the deforestation up in the basin, or what happened then, for example, in this case that I show you with this. You could have two opportunities, gray solutions or green solutions. Here you could build, for example, a big wall, or probably you could move these people, and then you start like a little forest here to protect, or put like some zones where the river could go in calm. So that's the decision of the court. In this specific case, the court put like an interdisciplinary theories in practice, so it's very interesting.
Hi, I'm Jiahe. I appreciate your notion of the rights to the nature. And I'm thinking you are saying about a very interesting concept about the surface rather than investment in the nature. So in the old paradigm, we use investment to the river and then to gain return. But now we need to surface the river for their rights. So I appreciate your ecocentric views, and I also see the success of Ecuador, but I'm wondering about what did the market do? And if they opposite the ecocentric view, because the ecocentric view may harm the interests of many market sector like utility, transportation, and fishing industries. So I'm wondering how did the state manage to overcome these obstacles to build the ecocentric view and the constitution for Ecuador? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Probably is not the opposite or is not allowed to do both at the same time. But in fact, the idea is to put in practice these new ideas that I protect the nature, not only because I use it like an object. I protect it because I use it, of course, and I could use it, but of course, there is, in the other hand, the idea of I protect it by its own. For example, in the specific case of Ecuador, you could, for example, exploitate any resources in specific areas with the authorization, etc. It's not that there is not allowed in anywhere. You have like in specific areas, national parks, natural protected areas, etc., when you have a special protection. So that's the reason that you have in the other way like an open way to exploitate and to develop the country, because you need to maintain and you keep your citizens as well. Thank you.
Hi, I have actually two questions. And the first one would be, have you had situations, or do you think there might be risk that private bodies use this legal protection for resources as a way to gain profit, I think? Because I feel like this gives companies that own resource, gives them a lot of chances to exploit this natural rights, I guess. And my second question is, I've seen this view that it is a lot about mindset and approach. So what do you think? Do you think it's culture coded, or how do you think we can start implementing this into our society? Can it be on the state level? Does it come from like grassroots efforts? Thank you.
Thank you so much. In fact, private sector companies as well are not so happy with these new visions and try to put limits. For example, in the case specific of Ecuador, with the new composition of the Constitutional Court, each 3 years, the court changed 3 of their members. The new composition, for example, before that, the decision I told you, they put some limits about rights of nature, for example, because they have the pressure of the system, because they are worried about what happened with the rest of the resources. About the second question, probably it's not too easy as copy and paste the concept, but probably it's a new debate. And as a debate of rights, of philosophy, or other issues in other areas, probably each country could have their own response. What's my idea? It's not like too simple to say, okay, you need to reform your constitution and to recognize in each country around the world rights of nature. Probably not. Probably you could name it with other form, and you could obtain the same. And probably in the global north, not in all the countries, but probably in some of them, you don't need it because you have other instruments that works before, as the classical environmental law. Why I need this measure if the measures I have works? Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you for your beautiful lecture. I have a question regarding the Constitution and also the fact that a particular nation like Ecuador may be able to take care of their the rights of the nature, so to speak, and so on and so forth. But as we know, global warming is a planetary phenomenon. So you can do all you want in your own country, but what if your nearby country is doing something wrong that will eventually affect your nature? How do you deal with that?
It's not too easy, but probably the response is that if anybody do anything, probably it will be worse. So if a small country like Ecuador starts with something, probably someone could replicate in the future. It's interesting. I don't say that is the solution, but for example, in the Constitution of 2008, Ecuador recognized as well climate change as a problem produced by the human, and put in practice some ideas from the regulation and, of course, through public policies. It's not too easy because we have like a really instability of governments, because in Latin America, you know, like we have like in some spaces like left movements, then we have a strong rights movement. But probably the Constitution is the way how we keep these ideas. But remember, we have 20 constitutions, so probably in the future, some some political parties could change it.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. My name's Tessa Michael. I'm a first-year MRP student. My question is very much like this last one, so thank you for your question. I'm from San Diego, which is a border town, and across the border is Tijuana, which has a river estuary. It's heavily polluted. It runs into the Pacific Ocean. Our beaches have to be closed sometimes. People get sick, wildlife is harmed. It's very much a public health crisis and environmental crisis. So my question is, and I think it's again a good segue from this last question, can you speak further on how the rights of nature and the rights to the city may be able to be exercised and protected, especially in the San Diego and Tijuana context of an international border that has very much a history and still present day militarized conflict?
Thank you so much. And that's a very really interesting question to talk about what happened with international water basin, for example, and how to cooperate and to governance it. So you have some ideas not only with rights of nature and not only with rights of city, as well, for example, for international water rights, because you have like some conference and you have some declarations of it. So probably the main idea is that we have a shared resource. So that shared resource, you could do two things. First, the bad thing, you said, I want to only put in practice and to only put a win idea only for me, and I don't believe what happened with you, but probably in the context, the healthy problem, the environmental problem that happens in Tijuana in Mexico goes directly to my border. And the second one is to try to obtain a win-win response, where to share the problem, to try to fix together, and to put in practice some ideas that probably is not my fault, but the effects of the other affect me. So to try not to think like this, only to directly to watch my shoes, to try to understand that we are in a context, and in that context we have a lot of problems. Only to understand this and go a little more to the south. For example, what happened with Brazil? Brazil, they have in the last 10 years like some changes in their administration. For example, with Lula and before with Bolsonaro. The people from the European Union, for example, give some pressure to Brazil government about the exportations, about, for example, what happened with meat, what happened with fruits, etc., because they said, okay, if you are until in that idea of deforestation, I will not buy your products. So probably in the future, we could give some ideas like that, that is not from only for regulation, it's like other ways to give pressure in that way.
Thank you for coming. Obviously, protecting the environment is of critical importance, and equally obviously, we're not doing nearly well enough in protecting the environment. But isn't there a major practical as well as a kind of intellectual problem with the concept of rights of nature? And the problem is nature doesn't recognize anything about rights. For example, millions of species have disappeared over time. Long before human beings were driving them off the earth, nature drove species off the earth. We're sitting here above Cayuga Lake. The stream that runs into Cayuga Lake wants to destroy Cayuga Lake. It wants to fill it up so there's no lake there. And if we wait long enough, that's exactly what will happen. Cayuga Lake doesn't have a right to exist under nature. And so I'm just interested in your response, because, as I said, there are lots of reasons to protect the environment and we're not doing well enough. But I'm afraid that in many ways, the discussions of the rights of nature will lead us down paths that are immensely complex. And we will not spend time doing the things we need to do to try to protect nature because we're trying to unravel lots of difficult problems. If a river has a right to exist, why not an individual animal? Why not an individual tree? But that individual tree, the tree next to it is trying to kill it, whether it's the same species or a different species. The fish in the lake or the river is trying to be eaten by a different fish. And so I'm curious what your answer is.
Thank you so much, and this is a very interesting question, of course. And the idea and the development of the rights of nature theory, there are two main ideas. The first one is that you say you could recognize rights of nature if you have in practice the idea of interspecies theory. It's not like an individual, because it's what I recognize rights of nature as the ecosystem, not directly one tree, one stream, one fish. And the second one is not only the interspecies, it's the interecosystem theory that said that you recognize the idea of rights of nature, for example, in the case of the river, because it connects a lot. But it's not the case, for example, like an animal. This is other theory. I'm not talking about that. Is, for example, what happened to people. I respect a lot, but this is the ideas of rights of animals. In the rights of animals, they recognize as an individual. And they recognize, for example, by two categories. The first one is about how to satisfy their behavior, and the second one to put some protections, for example, when you experiment on it, etc. To not allowed, for example, in some specific proofs. But in the case of rights of nature specific, is not as simple that said, I recognize that rock, I recognize that tree, or I recognize that fish. It's the idea if that put in practice these two main ideas of interspecies and interecosystem.
What about taking the lake versus the stream?
Yeah.
The stream will destroy Cayuga Lake if we wait long enough. So it'll take thousands of years, but it will happen.
Yeah.
Just the way Beatty Lake is almost disappearing behind the scene. Beatty Lake is very shallow now because it has filled up with sediment. Eventually the same thing will happen to Cayuga Lake.
Yeah, but yes, of course. But I said before, probably it's not the same response in different countries. Why? For example, here, the environmental regulations work. Not in the best form, of course, because you have a lot of problems of pollution, etc. But we think about this response of rights of nature because in the Global South, the first ideas of environmental rights didn't work. So that's the reason why we appeal for other theoretical category to response. Thank you for your question.
Okay, thank you. My name is Zifa. I'm a second-year MPA student. Thank you for your lecture. My previous works involve a lot of policy advocacy, facilitating Indonesian policymakers with the communities. And we see a growing campaign from the government to develop or transform into green and smart cities. One of our giant project is actually developing the Indonesian new capital in the midst of Borneo Island, or which home to our densest rainforests and also diverse indigenous communities. My question is, in your experience, what are the best or most meaningful way for or to involve indigenous communities in the efforts of sustainable remediation or transforming into green and smart cities? Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have a lot of problems specific with native people. For example, since 2008, we recognized as a plurinationality country. That was a very big aspiration of native people, and they obtained that. But we have a problems between the state and their companies where they start to exploit natural resources. So in some of our Latin American countries, we recognize, for example, international treaties specific with the land of native people. So they have the right to the consultation measures. But in not all the cases, the state respect that. So we have, for example, international responsibility in that cases. But for example, for some cities and for some private sectors, this right become like a block, like a wall to the normal development. But you have to put in a practical way what is most important. Most important is to have the dignity and to respect the dignity of the people or the development. Probably for people who are with investment is the first one, but probably the response, of course, is dignity. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. My name is Cameron. I'm a third-year undergraduate in the City and Regional Planning Department. I'm curious about thinking constitutionally and I guess somewhat politically about the security of the rights to nature. Forgive me, I'm from the United States context, so I'm used to, you know, kind of these political moments changing where you'll have progressive moments and then, you know, we'll kind of revert back to some old theories or whatever it is. And so I'm curious in this context, if rights are something that are maintained across different versions of the Constitution so that it's something that is always expanding, or if there are also cases of rights being taken away.
Thank you so much. Remember that this recognition of nature as a subject of rights is since 2008, so it's our 20 Constitution. So probably in the next 10 years, the things could change. But the security could be that we have a principle that is a progressive principle, that you only could change in a better way, not to return it. So probably that will be the security or the key we have for that. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Stella Connaughton. I'm a first-year MRP student, and my question has to deal with the right of nature in the court of law. So obviously in a court of law, the right of nature is represented by humans. A human is ultimately going to be advocating for the right of nature. And oftentimes there will be different groups, often with conflicting goals or imposing their own values or ideas on what's the best for nature or how to best advocate for nature. So in this case, how can we, I guess, in a court of law, best advocate for the right of nature when there's so many different groups putting their own values, putting their own bias on what nature wants, and the fact that innately in a court of law, it's always going to be a human communicating and advocating for and against nature?
Thank you so much. Of course, that will be like a distortion of what the nature needs, of course, because as you said, a human will represent. But the regulation in Ecuador, for example, said that to represent the nature, everybody could be. But in some cases that you don't have that representation, you have the idea of the ombudsperson, the ombudsman. The ombudsman is in some countries like that figure that is the institutional figure that defends the human rights. So that institutions could collaborate and to try to search for the best. But of course, in the most cases of rights of nature, in the most cases, you have like this academic and technical support, because it's not too easy, for example, for you and I that were not experts, for example, in biodiversity or in ecology, to talk about the behavior or the quality of the water. So you have a lot of people who collaborate to put in practice that measures and specific all these levels and variables there.
Thank you.
Hello, Sam Sokolov. I'm an MRP student. I was kind of curious where you draw the line between anthropocentrism and ecocentrism. And I guess if we're enacting the rights of nature, are we doing it primarily so that humans can enjoy nature or at least have a stable biosphere? Or do you view the rights of nature as something that's like putting nature first, even if the perceived economic activity or social benefit from potentially exploiting a resource of nature would help humans more broadly, however you define that, compared to help nature?
Okay, of course, people for their behavior and to obtain their obviously sustainable as a species want to exploit and to use some resources. The idea is not to put a prohibition or not allowed to exploit and to do anything. The idea is to try to be in harmony between the logical resources that you need, and on the other hand, the idea of to protect the nature not only as an object. That's the practical vision and the practical function. So if I put like a subject of rights, in that case, it represents to restore, to respect the cycle and the reparation. Of course, not only to be like an object that can I use and I can obtain only resources for it. That's all. Thank you.
So with that, I think we'll close up the questions. I want to thank you all for your excellent questions, and I want to invite you to continue in a more informal conversation with food in room 106 of West Sibley. Please come and join us for the talk back. And now I'd like to give a round of applause to Dr. Martínez for his presentation.
Thank you, Professor Warner. Thank you, everybody.